The story surrounding Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds continues to evolve, not because of new legal rulings, but because of how information is being interpreted and circulated. In recent days, attention has shifted toward private communications that have entered the public conversation and the way those communications are being used to shape broader narratives. This isn't unusual in high-profile disputes. When text messages or voice recordings become public, they often take on a weight that goes beyond their original purpose. Tone, timing, and context begin to matter just as much as content, sometimes more. What's important to note at the outset is that this phase of the story is not about new allegations, verdicts, or findings. It's about context. Context around how people were communicating, context around what pressures existed at the time, and context around how later interpretations are forming. Much of the current discussion centers on a voice memo that's now being widely referenced. Before reacting to it, it's worth understanding why it exists and what it represents. According to reporting, this recording was part of an ongoing exchange focused on logistics, scheduling, and personal pressures, not accusations or demands. As you listen to it, it's important to keep that frame in mind. This audio isn't a conclusion, it isn't a verdict, and it isn't evidence of intent on its own. It's a snapshot of communication at a particular moment, and moments don't exist in isolation. How that snapshot is interpreted now depends largely on the narrative it's being placed into.
Hey, I hope you're so well. Just wanted to connect, just to put something on your radar. So between us, like this is so premature for me to even share this with you. All good stuff. Headline is great stuff. But I was talking to Ryan and I was like, I don't know if we should share this, but he was like, you guys have such a great trust, fill him in. But basically the movie I'm doing before Proxy, I sat down with the director and he was great and so lovely and I'm so excited to work with him. And, we were just talking about how we have very little time to prep and, it's a lot of work. And he was like, is there any way you can get the other movie to push? Like, I just feel like I need more time. And I was like, that ship is so sailed. And, and I've been, really, really under it. I don't talk to him like I talk to you. So I haven't told him like how stressed I've been with not having a baby nurse. Still don't have one, by the way. Found someone and only available for like 5 days. But anyway, still don't have a baby nurse. Just the idea of going back to work right away. And also the idea of like, prepping for our movie and like wanting to work out every day and all that. But yet being on set all day, every day. I'm like, what have I done? Like the only reason that I'm doing Proxy before is because I gave them my word and I wouldn't go back on that and felt like I had to make it work. But like having a week off in between, it's just a lot. It's a lot. And the closer the reality gets, the more I'm just like panicking about that. Because I'd really like to just focus on our movie. So anyway, when I saw that he was asking for more time, I was just like, I have a crazy idea, but like, what if we went in September? Like I'll do this movie with you, but like, I just feel like I need more time before I go back to work and I need more like, shooting in April, shooting in March is just too soon after having a baby and not sleeping and wanting to be in my best shape and all that. So anyway, I'm trying to work on that. I think that's a possibility. So I just wanted to let you know that, like, in case you wanted to go a couple weeks earlier, you're welcome to. And obviously there's selfish reasons I'm telling you this. Like, I know that our schedules are scheduled. I'm not trying to move anything. But, like, if by chance you're like, oh, my God, if I could go 2 weeks earlier, that would actually be great, then amazing. And if it is what it is, then it is what it is. But selfishly, what I would love about that is that, Ryan and I have also been really stressed about spending a month apart. And, none of it's your problem. That's why I'm talking to you as a friend at this point more than anything. But the idea of spending all of June apart is just a lot. And the most we've ever done is less than 2 weeks. So our girls get out of school, I think I mentioned to you, on June 16th. We were going to originally go to London June 17th. But now I think with our schedule, we're not done till like June 29th or so. So, selfishly, if we could go a couple weeks earlier, we could stick to our original plan and leave for London after the girls get out of school, which would be amazing. And maybe that's like nicer for you, or maybe you're like, why are you saying this? This is like horrifying that you're mentioning us starting 2 weeks earlier. But anyway, I just wanted to mention it. But I just, having until the beginning of May is really important to me, because I don't feel like I could pull it off any sooner than that. And I was really stressed. So I think that I gracefully make this shift happen because our director feels aligned with it. It's nothing that I could have done selfishly. But anyway, I told you in 4 minutes what I could have told you in 30 seconds. But please, again, keep this between us, because as of now, this movie's still shooting in 6 weeks, 5 weeks, whenever it is. I think it's 6 weeks. So nothing has changed, but I just sort of wanted to get your temperature on all that. Okay, cool. So nice talking to you. Not talking to you. This is so sad. This is my social interaction these days, just talking into voice memos. Okay, I hope you're well. Send my love. Don't know me. Take care. Bye.
The situation involving Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds continues to generate attention, not because of a decisive legal outcome, but because of how information is being interpreted as it moves through the media ecosystem. At this stage, the conversation is largely driven by reaction rather than resolution. Each new development, whether it's a statement, a private communication, or a media response, is quickly absorbed into a broader storyline that feels increasingly settled, even though the underlying process remains ongoing. This gap between perception and process is where narratives begin to take shape. In high-profile disputes, context is often the first thing to erode. Information rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it surfaces in fragments, spread out over time, and introduced at moments when audiences already have expectations about what the story means. Once those expectations form, new material is often evaluated through them rather than on its own terms. Timing plays a critical role here. When earlier moments are revisited after a narrative has gained momentum, they are frequently reinterpreted retroactively. Instead of asking what was happening at the time, audiences ask how a moment fits into what they now believe occurred later. Meaning moves backward, and context narrows. This is especially common in celebrity news and entertainment commentary, where public familiarity creates emotional shortcuts. Well-known figures like Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds bring existing impressions with them, and those impressions can influence how audiences interpret even neutral information. At the same time, the legal process unfolds at a very different pace. Despite frequent references to lawsuit updates, courts do not move in response to public reaction. Legal matters progress through filings, responses, and procedural steps that rarely provide immediate clarity. When those updates are sparse or technical, media narratives often fill the gap with interpretation. This is not inherently malicious, it is structural. Media ecosystems are built around immediacy and engagement. Legal systems are built around verification and due process. When those two systems intersect, friction is inevitable. As coverage expands, allegations, even when discussed broadly or without detail, can begin to shape public understanding before they are tested, contextualized, or resolved. Once that happens, earlier communications are often revisited as though they were signals pointing toward an outcome that was not yet defined at the time. This is how ordinary moments take on outsized significance. Instead of remaining part of a larger timeline, they become symbols within a simplified narrative. Nuance gives way to implication. Complexity is reduced to coherence. The result is a story that feels increasingly definitive without being conclusively resolved. Another factor that contributes to this shift is the way language evolves as narratives mature. Early coverage may emphasize uncertainty and open questions. Over time, subtle changes in phrasing can suggest confidence even when facts remain unchanged. Phrases that imply clarity or inevitability begin to appear, not always overtly, sometimes through tone rather than wording. That gradual shift signals to audiences that conclusions are forming, whether or not the underlying information supports them. This is where perception begins to outpace verification. Importantly, this phase of a story does not require new evidence. It relies on repetition, familiarity, and the natural human tendency to seek resolution. When stories remain unresolved for long periods, audiences often fill in the blanks themselves. They connect timelines, they infer motive, they assume intent. Those assumptions can feel intuitive, especially when reinforced by consistent framing across multiple platforms. But intuition is not the same as confirmation. As this process continues, the narrative frame becomes increasingly resistant to change. New information is filtered through it rather than evaluated independently. Clarifications struggle to gain traction. Context arrives late, if at all. Understanding this dynamic does not require taking sides or drawing conclusions. It requires recognizing how narratives form in environments where speed, familiarity, and engagement often outweigh patience and verification. This stage matters because it establishes the foundation for everything that follows. Once a narrative frame solidifies, it influences how all subsequent information is received. Even neutral developments can be interpreted as confirmation or contradiction, depending on how they align with existing beliefs. And when that happens, the story stops being driven by process and starts being driven by perception. That shift is subtle, but it is powerful. It explains why conversations can feel so certain even when outcomes remain unresolved. And it sets the stage for the next phase, where repetition and amplification begin to accelerate those perceptions even further. Once a narrative frame begins to solidify, the next force that drives momentum is media amplification. Amplification does not require new information. It relies on repetition, visibility, and reaction. When a story gains traction, it is revisited across platforms, summarized in different formats, and discussed through multiple lenses. Each iteration reinforces familiarity, and familiarity often feels like certainty. In the situation involving Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds, this phase has been marked by an expanding cycle of commentary rather than a steady flow of verified developments. Coverage builds on coverage. Reactions become the subject of new reactions. Over time, the story becomes less about what is actually changed and more about how it is being discussed. This is a common escalation pattern. Initial reporting introduces a topic. Commentary responds. Social engagement amplifies the response. And soon, the narrative grows faster than the underlying facts. One reason this happens is that media systems reward continuity. Stories that perform well are more likely to be revisited, even if there is little new to report. In those moments, interpretation often fills the gap left by limited updates. Legal processes, by contrast, move slowly and deliberately. While audiences may expect frequent lawsuit updates, court timelines rarely align with that expectation. Filings take time. Responses take time. Procedural steps unfold behind the scenes. When those steps are not immediately visible, speculation can take their place. This creates an imbalance. Media momentum continues forward while legal clarity remains static. The result is a widening gap between what is being said publicly and what has actually been determined. As that gap grows, commentary may begin to reference potential outcomes or procedural milestones, including discussions around summary judgment. These references are often speculative, framed as possibilities rather than conclusions, but even speculation can influence perception. Mentioning legal mechanisms can signal inevitability, even when no threshold has been met. For audiences, the presence of legal terminology can imply progress toward resolution, regardless of whether that progress exists. Over time, this can contribute to a sense of the story is approaching closure, even as the formal process remains far from it. Another factor driving amplification is emotional framing. Content that evokes reaction tends to travel farther than content that emphasizes uncertainty. Commentary may focus on tone, implication, or perceived imbalance because those elements are easier to engage with than procedural detail. As a result, broader themes sometimes enter the narrative through association rather than evidence. Discussions may expand to include sensitive topics, such as SH claims, even when the material being referenced does not explicitly make or substantiate such claims. This expansion is not always intentional. It often reflects the way narratives stretch as they move across platforms and audiences. But once introduced, these themes can be difficult to disentangle from the core facts. The risk here is drift. As narratives widen, distinct elements can blur together. Context compresses. Separate issues are folded into a single storyline. Audiences may assume coherence where there is actually fragmentation. This is where amplification becomes escalation. Repetition reinforces interpretation. Interpretation hardens into belief, and belief begins to shape how all subsequent information is received. Another consequence of amplification is the expansion of involvement. As coverage grows, secondary figures may be pulled into the conversation simply because of association or proximity. Each addition broadens the scope of the story, increasing attention but reducing clarity. The narrative becomes more crowded, and with that crowding comes simplification. Complex timelines are condensed, multiple perspectives are reduced to a single through line. What remains is easier to repeat, but harder to evaluate. As this process continues, public reaction begins to feed back into coverage. Strong reactions are highlighted, polarized takes gain visibility. Algorithms reward engagement, not restraint. This feedback loop accelerates certainty. The more people respond as though the story is settled, the more settled it feels, regardless of the status of verification or legal process. At this stage, slowing the narrative becomes challenging. Silence can be interpreted as avoidance. Clarification can be framed as strategy. Even cautious language may be dismissed as deflection. Once amplification reaches this level, narratives tend to move forward through momentum rather than evidence. Understanding this phase is essential because it explains why stories can feel overwhelming even when little has changed substantively. It shows how repetition can substitute for resolution and how media systems can accelerate perception faster than process. This is not about intent or blame, it's about structure. And once that structure takes hold, it sets the stage for the final shift, where perception begins to harden and space for uncertainty starts to close. By the time a story reaches this phase, the most consequential shift has already occurred. The conversation is no longer centered on what is known, what is disputed, or what remains unresolved. Instead, it begins to operate as though conclusions have already been reached. This is the moment when perception hardens. In the situation involving Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, and Ryan Reynolds, this hardening has not been driven by definitive legal findings. There has been no ruling that resolves the central questions, no judicial determination that establishes responsibility or outcome, and yet confidence in interpretation continues to grow. This disconnect is not accidental. It emerges from the cumulative effect of repetition, framing, and expectation. Once audiences encounter the same narrative patterns often enough, uncertainty begins to feel unnecessary. That is where complexity starts to disappear. One of the ways perception hardens is through subtle shifts in language. Early coverage tends to emphasize ambiguity. Phrases like "questions remain" or "details are still emerging" are common. Over time, those phrases fade. They are replaced by language that implies understanding, even when facts remain unchanged. Certainty does not arrive all at once. It accumulates. Repeated exposure to similar framing creates familiarity, and familiarity can feel like confirmation. Audiences may not remember where a particular interpretation originated, only that it seems widely accepted. This is especially powerful in stories involving recognizable public figures. When names like Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are involved, audiences often feel they already understand the dynamics at play. That sense of familiarity lowers skepticism. Once skepticism drops, narratives close faster. Another feature of hardened perception is retroactive interpretation. Earlier moments are revisited and assigned new meaning based on current beliefs. Communications that were once viewed as routine or ambiguous are reframed as significant. Tone is reassessed, motive is inferred. This process creates the illusion of coherence. Instead of seeing events as they unfolded, unevenly, imperfectly, and without foresight, audiences reconstruct them into a linear story that appears intentional and inevitable. That reconstruction is rarely conscious. It feels intuitive, but intuition is shaped by narrative, not by verification. Framing plays a central role in this phase. When stories begin to adopt criminal framing, even indirectly or metaphorically, the range of possible interpretations narrows. Audiences may assume that legal thresholds are closer than they are, or that certain outcomes are implied. This kind of framing does not require explicit accusation. It can emerge through emphasis, analogy, or repeated association. Once introduced, it influences how subsequent information is processed. New details are no longer evaluated on their own merits. They are judged based on whether they reinforce or disrupt the established frame. This is where correction becomes difficult. Clarifications are perceived as backtracking. Context is dismissed as excuse-making. Nuance is treated as evasion. As perception hardens, the gap between belief and formal process widens. Legal systems are designed to move carefully. Evidence must be evaluated, claims must be tested, procedures must be followed. These safeguards exist to prevent premature conclusions. Media narratives, by contrast, are driven by momentum. Once a story feels settled in the public imagination, the absence of new legal information does not slow engagement. In some cases, it intensifies speculation. Silence is filled with interpretation. This creates a paradox. The more uncertain the process remains, the more certain the narrative can feel. Premature certainty carries real costs. When narratives close too early, they limit the ability to integrate new information. Future developments are filtered through existing beliefs rather than assessed independently. This affects not only how stories are understood, but how accountability is perceived. Oversimplified narratives rarely leave room for complexity, contradiction, or revision. That does not mean accountability should be avoided. It means accountability should be grounded in evidence, not momentum. When perception hardens before verification, accountability risks becoming symbolic rather than substantive. The dynamics at play here are not unique to this case. They reflect broader patterns in how modern media ecosystems handle unresolved situations. Speed is rewarded, engagement is prioritized, ambiguity is uncomfortable. As a result, stories tend to move toward closure even when closure has not been earned. This is especially true when emotionally resonant material is involved. Emotion accelerates interpretation, interpretation accelerates certainty, and certainty feels satisfying. Framing plays a central role in this phase. When stories begin to adopt criminal framing, even indirectly or metaphorically, the range of possible interpretations narrows. Audiences may assume that legal thresholds are closer than they are, or that certain outcomes are implied. This kind of framing does not require explicit accusation. It can emerge through emphasis, analogy, or repeated association. Once introduced, it influences how subsequent information is processed. New details are no longer evaluated on their own merits. They are judged based on whether they reinforce or disrupt the established frame. This is where correction becomes difficult. Clarifications are perceived as backtracking. Context is dismissed as excuse-making. Nuance is treated as evasion. As perception hardens, the gap between belief and formal process widens. Legal systems are designed to move carefully. Evidence must be evaluated. Claims must be tested. Procedures must be followed. These safeguards exist to prevent premature conclusions. Media narratives, by contrast, are driven by momentum. Once a story feels settled in the public imagination, the absence of new legal information does not slow engagement. In some cases, it intensifies speculation. Silence is filled with interpretation. This creates a paradox. The more uncertain the process remains, the more certain the narrative can feel. Premature certainty carries real costs. When narratives close too early, they limit the ability to integrate new information. Future developments are filtered through existing beliefs rather than assessed independently. This affects not only how stories are understood, but how accountability is perceived. Oversimplified narratives rarely leave room for complexity, contradiction, or revision. That does not mean accountability should be avoided. It means accountability should be grounded in evidence, not momentum. When perception hardens before verification, accountability risks becoming symbolic rather than substantive. The dynamics at play here are not unique to this case. They reflect broader patterns in how modern media ecosystems handle unresolved situations. Speed is rewarded, engagement is prioritized, ambiguity is uncomfortable. As a result, stories tend to move toward closure even when closure has not been earned. This is especially true when emotionally resonant material is involved. Emotion accelerates interpretation. Interpretation accelerates certainty, and certainty feels satisfying.